Okay, welcome back again. We're going to have a quick run at the Salience network and looking at some of what our brain is consciously aware of and what the impact of this is on ourselves and when we're dealing with other people and young people. So I'm just going to do this. Okay, we're going to pop it on. So what we're having a look at here very quickly is the salience network in the brain. So this is a process that moves us between what we have pictured here on the left, the default mode network, and the central executive network. So the central executive network can also be called the task positive network. That's associated with and thought to be all to do with, or certainly predominantly to do with, when we are achieving tasks. We have a goal-oriented task. We actually have a physical thing, something we want to achieve, an action we want to take. That comes under the central executive network. And you'll recognize that as we go through this module, that we're looking at executive functioning, and the central executive network is associated with executive functioning. The default mode network that's pictured on the left is actually when you're not doing anything. When you don't have any task to do, any specific thing to do, the default mode network is where the energy and the activity tends to remain in the brain. So that is thought to be predominantly self-referential, thinking about yourself in regard to reality, to history, running over things in your mind that have happened, projecting into the future, simulating possible outcomes of things that might happen. And those things can either take on a more positive general nature. So I'm somebody that's very happy to sit and daydream and think about life, the universe and everything, and I tend to come up with, certainly at this point in my life, happy and peaceful state of being in my default mode network. If you're at a time in your life when you're struggling, or can be associated with depression and anxiety, and also a degree of association with neurodivergent individuals being more influenced in this state, you can end up going around in circles that can become quite negative, self-referential. So remembering things and having a sense of embarrassment or shame or crippling anxiety, even thinking about things historically and then thinking about moving forward, having to see people again. Things in the default mode network don't tend to galvanate us to actual action. We can just sit and stay in that state unless we have a thought that gives us enough impetus that it wants us to actually change something immediately. Central executive network, however, can therefore be utilized to escape some of these circular thinking patterns, or is to focus your attention externally. So rather than that internal processing, you think about, what can I see in the room? Well, there is the door. I'll get up and I'll go use the door. Or the processes that are associated with people who have panic attacks, where you say, name 5 things you see, name 4 things you hear, and you go down through the senses and bringing the focus out to the world around them to help shift where our focusing is. Now, the salience network normally does that job for us. So it is deciding what is salient to our survival. So we can be sitting there and daydreaming away, but if a spider lands on our lap, we're going to most likely jump up and move. The salience network decides that is important to our comfort levels, our survival. Our autonomic nervous system has tripped in as well. So that in that process, the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC on there, is about balancing out between arguments. So it will decide what is salient and important to the brain. So what is salient and important to the brain can be very, very different to what an adult, for example, thinks is salient that a child ought to be doing, or even what we consciously think about for ourselves. So, for example, I might think is very important to get my studies done so that I can hand in my, a module at university early so that I can then relax afterwards. And that might be what consciously I think I want to have happen. But the salience network in my brain may not decide that that is essential to my survival. And so I don't have that on my side helping switch me over to central executive network. We can choose to switch to central executive network by just focusing on an external task. And we can utilize that process. We look at that in module 5 and some of the ways that we can do things to support ourselves on our journey. So we're going to have a quick look at the next slide, which is an overall very quick sketch of the brain. The reason this one is in here is to consider, especially when we're thinking about that salience network of how things are worked out, what importance. The brain overall is estimated to be processing about 400 trillion bits of information per second. So it's like little computer bits. Whereas in our prefrontal cortex, where we are aware of the information, what we are aware of and thinking about, and we can sort of have that internal sensation of what we are processing, is about 50 bits per second. So if you think about the balance between the 400 trillion pieces of information that your brain is processing about internal state, external state, predicting what is going to happen next in your environment or in your life, simulating things to keep you safe so you can have practice runs in your default mode network, so it's practicing things in there. And those things are becoming up to your awareness. Out of all those things, the decisions that you make with just this part of your brain can be very minuscule in comparison to the amount of other things that your brain is doing. So that's why the more we align with what our brain's actual job is, and the ways that it actually works, rather than trying to impose what we think are right and wrong things to do, then we have a bit more success, and we have all of that processing power a bit more behind us, rather than working against our puny little 50 bits of information. I think that probably covers the basic introduction to that. The Salience Network will get mentioned again and again as we go through the course. So that's your introduction to it, and what that means and why that's important for us to understand that is a process in the brain deciding what is salient, and how we can align with that. We'll look at those things later in the course.